1801. I have just returned from a visit to my landlord, the solitary neighbour that I shall be troubled with. This is certainly a beautiful country. In all England, I do not believe that I could have fixed on a situation so completely removed from the stir of society. A perfect misanthropist's heaven. Hello, my name is Joanna Cannon, and we're here today to discuss Wuthering Heights, one of my favourite books, which is this month's pick for the Queen's Reading Room Book Club. When Wuthering Heights first came out, people were shocked. It was very controversial. It was very controversial for a woman to write a novel, let alone a novel that was so unapologetically brutal, almost, and wild and violent. So people were very critical of Wuthering Heights. But slowly over time, it kind of developed a cult following. And people began to appreciate that Emily wasn't just writing a shocking thing for the sake of being shocking. She was being honest, and she was a trailblazer. So they slowly began to come around to the idea. It took us a while to get there, but we slowly came around to the idea that Emily was just speaking the truth. And she was a controversial character in her own right. She was a loner. She liked walking. She liked playing the piano. She liked keeping herself to herself. And 170 years later, I can totally relate to how she lived her life. So people look back and try and label her. Was she neurodivergent? She liked routine. She was quite rigid. Was she neurodivergent? Was she autistic? And she also fasted. She was very ahead of her time. So people say, oh, maybe she had an eating disorder. Because giving people labels makes us feel safe and comfortable. But Emily was just Emily. And what I truly admire about her is she wasn't afraid to be herself. And she wasn't afraid to write the story she wanted to write. And we're all very grateful that she did. I'm sure there are people out there who haven't read Wuthering Heights. So just to recap a little, it's very difficult to say what it's about because it's about so many different things. But Wuthering Heights is Emily Bronte's only novel. And it was first published in 1847. And most people think of it as a great love story between Cathy and Heathcliff, but it's much darker and much more complicated than that. It's a story of obsession, of revenge, of jealousy, even of domestic abuse. So there are dark levels to Wuthering Heights. And when it first came out, it was quite controversial, especially being written by a woman. Not expected, but very welcome. I first encountered Emily. Our first meeting was not a great one, I have to say. Emily's book was given to me as a set text at school. And I was a very stroppy 12-year-old. And I didn't like being told what to read because I'm the only child of an only child. And part of the joy of reading for me was choosing my own adventures. So somebody telling me I had to read something. And at that point, I had graduated from Anne of Green Gables and Little Women, and I was reading very dark, twisty stories about dead people. And I thought, I don't want to read some dusty historical love story. So I didn't realise, but I was being given the darkest, twistiest story of all time. And when it comes to dead people, I needn't have worried on that score. And once I started reading, I loved it. And why I loved it was because it was so authentic and so real and so honest, and it was so unlike other classics that I'd been given to read. And I fell in love with it. You know, when you're writing a novel, where you set that novel is so important. No location is by accident. And when you read Wuthering Heights, you can almost feel the wind and the rain and the ground beneath your feet. And obviously Emily was very, very attached to that part of the world. And you know, people say, oh, the landscape is a character in its own right, but it really is in this book. And you can't imagine this story being set anywhere else. There's a lot of pull in this story. There's a lot of opposites pulling against each other. You've got Catherine's two suitors. You've got the two houses and how different they are and how different the behaviours are and the people in the houses. And without that landscape of the moors, it wouldn't be so intense. You know, it turns the volume up on everything. And it makes the novel timeless because you can drive up on the moors right now, which aren't too far from where we're sitting here. And they're unchanged. And you can imagine Cathy and Heathcliff walking through the moors. And it's even become an adjective in my house. We'll go anywhere bleak and a little bit dull. We'll go, it's a bit Wuthering Heights up here, isn't it? So it's kind of gone into your own language. It's so ingrained. And I think that love of that part of the world is what makes this novel so incredibly special. You know, Wuthering Heights is a domestic novel. It's a novel set within a household in a very rigid environment, a small environment. But within that small domestic environment, Emily explores the biggest themes, which is a very clever thing to do because you put those themes in a confined space and they seem even bigger and even more important. So it is a domestic novel, but it totally turns that genre on its head. She's been very, very clever about it. So on the surface, you've got these very refined domestic lives, you know, and underneath it all, there are these big issues. You know, there's revenge, there's violence, there's temper, there's love, there's even the afterlife in there, much to my 12-year-old's delight. So she does take a viewpoint that gives it a very subversive nature because she's taking something that we're used to and she's turning it on its head and she's saying, look what's underneath here. Which, you know, for a reader is sometimes an uncomfortable thing, but it's a glorious thing because you end up with the most magnificent story. It's a very complicated relationship between Cathy and Heathcliff. And I think when I first read it as a stroppy 12-year-old, I thought Heathcliff was the most romantic, wonderful hero. I wanted to grow up and find my own Heathcliff and potentially live happily ever after. And when I read it kind of 10 years later, I thought, my God, this man is an absolute brute. He's a bully. He's awful. He's toxic. And I think that's what's so clever about the way that she's portrayed this, because you read it at different points in your life and you see something different because the relationship is so complex. You know, on the one hand, they have this spiritual connection, I am Heathcliff. They feel like one person. But that complexity and that sense of oneness also leads to turbulence and violence and temper. So she's very cleverly shown how love can be both intense and wonderful and utterly awful and destructive at the same time. And for a Victorian woman to write or even attempt to write a story like that is quite extraordinary. And it's so fresh that we are sitting here 170 years later discussing it because there are going to be people out there who completely relate to that sense of great love that is also incredibly destructive and harmful. I think every book that you read and every character that you meet, whether it's a fictional character or a real one, all change you in some way. So Wuthering Heights definitely changed me on each reading, and it affected me and influenced me, not in the way that I would try and copy Emily's style because no one ever could, but in the way that she gave us permission to look at the uncomfortable, to explore things that aren't just nice and neat and pleasantly packaged for a reader, to look at topics that are difficult. And if you look at a difficult topic as a writer and you do it with honesty and integrity, then your reader is going to see that truth. And even if it makes them uncomfortable to read it, they're going to appreciate your honesty through those pages. So I think she definitely affected me in that way. And she also taught us to be bold. She taught us to take chances. She taught us to write things from the heart. And it's almost as if this very quiet life that she led, she took whatever was inside her, this storm that was inside her, and put it on a page, almost like purging. And I think that is a really interesting thing to think about as a writer. What within you brings out that passion? What do you want to purge? So I think she gave us permission to be bold and to look deeper within ourselves and deeper within the human character, which is a great gift. I was approached by my publisher, HarperCollins, to contribute a short story to a collection of words influenced by Wuthering Heights. It was quite intimidating to begin with, and I thought, I need to set a novel on the moors between two. And I thought, no, you're not copying, it's just inspired. So what I tried to do was to take that intensity and that uncomfortable relationship and how love can very easily drift into compulsion and fixation, but put it in a modern setting and see how it translated over the centuries, because this novel is timeless and it's almost placeless. So I wanted to take that and see how it worked and how a small change, even one letter different in a word, can affect somebody's life. So it was a huge honour to be asked to do it. And it was quite uncomfortable inhabiting the Wuthering Heights world for a while because it's a very stormy place. And it can be a difficult place. But I think, like a storm, it's also intense and exhilarating. So to explore Emily's world and to think about how you can take that sense of emotion and that sense of understanding the human relationships and put it into a modern context, I think that was an interesting thing for me to do, and I learned a lot from it. I think Emily's work resonates even now because she wrote about timeless things. Everyone out there is going to understand love, and everyone's going to understand obsession and compulsion and intensity of how you feel about someone else. So she took those themes, which translate across the centuries, and because she wrote them with such honesty, it makes it feel fresh. It doesn't feel like it was published in 1847. It could have been published yesterday because of her honesty and her integrity. And I think that's why it resonates so much. And also the setting, because it's such a visceral, kind of elemental feeling when you read the book. There is no other book I can think of on the planet where the setting affects you so much. I can remember reading it and looking out of the window after I'd read it and thinking, oh, a road. Because I'd been so engrossed in being on the Yorkshire moors, I thought I was still on there. It has that kind of effect on you. And because they're still out there, looking pretty much the way that they did, I think that gives it also a timeless quality. So I think it was Emily herself and the way she viewed the world that makes this book so special. And if you think about this woman who lived a very solitary life with very little input from any other human beings, and she sat in this small space in Yorkshire and she wrote this story that we are still discussing today and we're still finding new things in today, I think that is utterly brilliant, and I think it's the most incredible legacy. Wuthering Heights is available from all good bookshops and your local library. Subscribe to the Queen's Reading Room for more bookish content.